Welcome to the Josh Huisman Podcast.
Welcome to the latest episode of the Josh Huisman Podcast, everyone. I am always blessed to be with you, and I am so thankful that you listened to this episode, that you watched the episode, and I would just ask that you would share this episode with friends and family and any ministry leaders that you want to encourage. And this would be a great episode to pass on to your pastor, to pass on to ministry leaders if you are one, because my guest today is Bob Bouwer. He is the pastor of Faith Church in Dyer, Indiana. And let me just give you a little background on this guy, because he's been doing this for a while, and it's good stuff.
I'm an old guy.
And he led Faith Church's congregation to a church that was meeting in South Holland, Illinois, years and years ago. They are now in Dyer, Indiana, where their average weekend attendance has grown to over 5,000 worshiping members at 6 different locations. Started years ago in the one location. Bob has a heart for reaching the spiritually disconnected, encouraging struggling church leaders, and supporting third world missions. He's got a book out called U-Turn Church that we're going to talk about. But let me just say thank you to Pastor Bob Bouwer for being on here. How are you doing?
Josh, it's great to be with you, and I'm doing really well. I'm blessed beyond measure. The Lord's been good to me.
Yeah. Well, you had a great answer when you popped on here, and I said, how you doing? You said, well, best as I could be this side of heaven, right?
That's right. Yes.
That's a good approach to take. So we've known each other for many years, and you have been someone in my life who, on the occasions that I'm able to be up in Indiana, you've been gracious enough to let me sit down with you on some occasions and just kind of pick your brain on your ministry experience. And so first, let me just say, I always love talking and meeting ministry leaders who are so open and gracious and want to help other leaders. And you are one of those guys. When did that start in your life?
Well, that's interesting, because I'm a minister's kid, or a PK or TO, preacher's kid or a theological offspring. And my dad was a pastor. And when I was a little kid, all the older ladies would come to church, pat me on the head and go, "Oh, Bobby, you're going to be just like your dad, be a pastor." And I repressed that because there was a sense at a very young age that I felt called into ministry. But I suppressed it because I didn't want to just do it because my dad did it.
Okay.
And so I, like you, as an athlete, got a little college basketball scholarship to play in a small college in Iowa. And about my first year at college, the chaplain of the Christian college I was at, Northwestern, he stopped. He goes, "When do you stop running from your calling?" And I said, "What do you mean?" Because everybody knows, Bob, you got a calling to ministry. It just exudes from you. So I did some time on my knees with the Lord and said, "Lord, that's your calling, isn't it?" And it was affirmed by the body of Christ. And that began the journey. The only problem, Josh, is I didn't necessarily love the church. I loved Jesus. I loved the Lord, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. I loved the upbringing I had in a Christian home. But the church was a battle a little bit, because it was so out of touch with my reality. It was like a time warp when I went to church. Mm-hmm. I love 6 days a week. 7th day was confusing to me. And so I was being called to the day that was not my favorite day.
Yeah, I can see the challenge here.
Yeah. And then as I got further on in college, the chaplain said, "Well, Bob, that's probably what God's calling you to do, is to go to the local church and see if God can use you to make a church relevant to its culture, alive with the gospel." Not that none of these churches were not. It's just that it wasn't relevant as a key word. It just seemed obscure to go to church. I listened to rock and roll and enjoyed music all week long. And then you get, and it's a great example, Josh, would be, I worked locally at a concrete company, and these guys were rough, cussing and swearing and chewing each other out, busting each other, a lot of bad language, that kind of stuff. They're a rough crowd. Mm-hmm. But then on weekends, I'd see them walk in church with suits and ties on and act prim and proper, like they were close to God. And it was such a dichotomy. It was like, Lord, I don't know if I want to be a part of that.
Yeah.
I want to be part of something that's alive. So that was part of my calling coming in. And then after college. I went to graduate school, to seminary. And then the unique story, remember the name Tony Campolo?
Yeah, I do.
Remember that name? Yeah.
Yeah.
He was speaking in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And my wife and I were there with the church that wanted to hire me after graduation from seminary. They wanted me to be the associate pastor, and that was a pretty slick, smooth transition. He's speaking to probably, I guess, 500 people at a conference. And he said, I don't normally do this, but I think the Lord's prompting me. There's a young couple here that is looking at a very comfortable future. God's calling you to the city. And Lori and I, my wife and I, literally said to each other, I think it's us. And she goes, I think it is. We kept silent. Break time comes. The church I'm with, their leader, their board, and their spouses at this conference, they go, Bob, that was you and Lori. I'm like, are you kidding me? They said, yeah, we felt like that. So then I went to the board at seminary where nearest job, it's a job possibilities. The next Monday, looked around and saw the biggest city I could find was New York City and Fort Lee, New Jersey, which is New Jersey side of the Bronx. Literally over the George Washington Bridge is Fort Lee, New Jersey, and the Bronx is on the other side of the bridge. And I said, okay. So I called and said, can I do an internship there? And they interviewed me. They took me there, and Lori and I went there. And I served as a youth pastor in the inner city for 3 years there. And one of the unique things is I've always, like you, Josh, believed in the gospel, evangelism, outreach, reaching disconnected people. But in the Midwest, that meant going to church and hearing about the gospel, but very few people sharing the gospel, very few people bringing people to Christ. It was just like, we're a gospel church. We'll support missions overseas. Well, when I got to Fort Lee, New Jersey, inner city church, literally, the senior pastor said, Bob, the first day, Tuesday, show up at night because we got God Squad. I said, what's God Squad? He goes, it's street evangelism. I said, what? He goes, street evangelism. He goes, just show up. So I come at 7:00. He does a half an hour discipleship about memorizing Bible verses. He said, okay, Bob, you take these two ladies and you hit Lemoyne Avenue in New Jersey. I said, what? I said, what do I do? He goes, they'll tell you what to do. So I hop in my car, and these two ladies in the car, and they're like, I said, excuse me, ladies, what do I do? They go, you walk up to people on Lemoyne Avenue, we'll show you, and you talk to them about Jesus. I'm like, are you freaking kidding me?
Is there a pamphlet that I have that maybe could give me some more direction?
Josh, so I literally pulled over, put my money in the parking meter, and they said, see the guy standing by the bus stop? Go talk to him. I said, okay. I walked across the street. I thought it was like the Jordan River. Lord parted the waters, and I walked up to this guy. I said, this is the craziest thing you're probably going to hear today. I go, do you mind while you're waiting for the bus if I talk to you about Jesus? He goes, I got 5 minutes. Give it to me. What you got? And I shared who Jesus was, and he is a business suit guy from New York City. He goes, no, I'm not interested, but thanks for sharing. Got on the bus and left. He didn't kill me. He didn't cuss me out. I'm like, okay. And slowly but surely, the Lord exploded my heart for loss because I saw people come to Christ. Not always me leading them to Christ, but the team. And I was privileged to lead a teenage young girl at a McDonald's at the end of the night, a couple weeks into it, to Christ. And I'm like, okay. And so that's when my heart for evangelism exploded. But I still felt a little bit out of sync with the New Jersey, New York area because I'm a Midwestern kid.
Yeah, right.
And then to finalize your question to me about my calling, Faith Reformed Church in South Holland, Illinois called me and said, Bob, would you be our associate pastor? Because they had heard that I had a passion for evangelism and discipleship. And I said, I'm interested, but I don't want to be an associate. Not that there's nothing wrong with being an associate. I said, but I want to preach, I want to teach, and I want to lead. I said, no. 6 months later, they called back and they said, well, you may not realize it, but our senior pastor is going to retire in a year and a half. You'd be associate. Would you come if it was co-pastorate, knowing that you'd take over when you retired? And I said, sure. I interviewed that process, and lo and behold, 1990, Lori and I, at that point, we had 2 of the 4 kids, made our way to South Holland, Illinois. I had no idea what South Holland was about, but I came to a church that was admittedly declining. They at one time were 500. They were down to about 250 or 225 when I got there. They had an awesome heart for the lost, but they didn't know how.
That's interesting. So when you say admittedly declining when you came in, Was that something behind the scenes that the leadership shared with you? Said, "Hey, this is the position we're in, and here's what we need. Here's what we feel God's calling you to lead us toward." So was that a behind the scenes thing, or was it something the church as a whole really felt, "Hey, we're in this place"?
I would answer that the whole would have awareness, because you go from 500 to 250. There's obviously a sign of something's not right.
Mm-hmm.
But the 250 were incredibly passionate about the Lord. They just didn't know how to reach the culture, the young adults of that day in 1990,
Mm-hmm.
that early 90s. And so that's where I sense the Lord's calling, because here's a guy who, from the Midwest, who has a passion for lost people in your region, in your town, in the surrounding community. And I was able to begin the journey with them to turn the church around by God's strength, God's doing. This is not Bob Bouwer's doing. I was just a leader that God asked.
Yeah.
And that process began.
Well, this is fascinating for me because I grew up in this town, and and I, of course, from a distance was aware of Faith Church, and just to tell how far we go back, 1990. So let's just I'm going to just put my cards on the table here.
Yeah.
I'm in 8th grade at this point, and my
dagger through my heart. I know.
I'm my friends and I. Here's my knowledge of Faith Church. We would go there and we would play basketball in the gym, and we had these volleyball courts out there on the side in South Holland, and a church of I wasn't familiar with the size of the church necessarily, and at that point, so you come in, you're co-pastoring the church, and you become the senior pastor of the church, right? And now it's one thing to be brought in and the leadership to share with you, "Hey, we're in decline. We really want to turn this around. What do you feel God's leading us to do to make these changes?" It is now another thing when you start implementing these changes and the response that takes place then. So with this being, it sounds like your first real church leadership role, were you aware of what you were stepping into?
Well, kinda. How to describe it? Really, really good people. The 250 that were there were really good people. They were traditional, and the church was struggling. I knew that I did not want to serve a church to bury it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew there was an urgency to them and to myself, my calling. Like, if I want to stay here at Faith Church, God, you're going to have to do something. And it got me to my knees begging the Lord for help.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that it was, the big breakthrough for me, Josh, was I decided after a couple years of just loving the people and them getting to know me and trust me, that I said, we need to find out what the community around Faith Church was asking. So we did a survey of 150 homes. I did South Holland, Lansing, and Thornton, and River Oaks Mall. We went around with a clipboard and said, "Hi, my name is Bob. Can I do a survey? Real quick questions like, do you go to church? Yes or no? If it's no, say, why did you leave? And then if it's yes, or, do you believe in God? Yes or no?" Well, the fascinating thing is 150 homes and people. We never met one atheist. That was my first kind of like, okay, what's going on here? Everybody had religious background. Everybody, 150 people. Catholic, Protestant, Reformed, Christian Reformed, Presbyterian, Methodist, Independent. But most of them had left the church. When I asked them, do you go to church? No. And then we asked why. And the top 3 answers blew us away. Church is judgmental. They didn't know what to wear. And the third one was the music was irrelevant. They didn't like the music. So I took that to our board and said, this is who we are. This is our community. And what can we do to reach them with those criterion boundaries? And so we decided to launch a new experience in worship. That's what we called it. We literally marketed, put on every doorknob on South Holland, Thornton, and Lansing, new church experience. Because it wasn't a new church. It existed already. Mm-hmm. New church, new worship experience. And we launched it. And I was, Josh, this is crazy. You're bringing back memories, man. The Saturday night before, I didn't sleep hardly at all. You can imagine. And I woke up about 4 a.m, went to church, and I got in the sanctuary, knelt down on the stairs in the front and said, Lord, I'm just freaking out. I said, I didn't hear an audible voice, but I heard the Lord speak to my soul and said, Bob, if one person shows up to that first new experience of worship, it was worth every dime, every prayer, every moment of effort for the glory of God. So all of a sudden I got up and said, we'll get one person, I think. We'll get for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Went home, showered, came back, did our normal 9:30 service, and 11 was a new experience at worship. All of a sudden, I walk in, and there's a guy with a leather jacket on, sitting in the back row. I said, hi, I'm Bob Bouwer. You must be new here. He goes, yes, I'm new. He said, I'm new because you're no longer a Dutch church. I said, what? He goes, I'm Italian. I said, no, help me out. Well, isn't Faith Reformed Church a Dutch church? I said, no, it's a Reformed church, and we're open to anybody. He goes, well, your sign says Faith Church, and it used to say Faith Reformed Church, and we thought Reform meant Dutch. I'm like, no. Within months, the guy came to Christ, was saved. But he was one of 150 that showed up the first day of the new experience of worship. In some respects, the rest is history.
Wow. That is fascinating. Yeah. So for a moment there, I thought you were going to say, and not even one showed up.
Yeah. That was my fear. No.
That would have been an interesting twist in the story right there.
Yeah. And I did know that. I knew that there would be some people coming because some of our members brought their unchurched, they told their unchurched friends, would you come? My pastor's asking us to bring someone to church and go to church. So I knew there was coming. So I knew the one was going to come. I just didn't know it would be that guy in the back seat before 11 o'clock.
So did you have to bring on kind of a new worship team or for a new experience? Yeah. Was there it seems like probably a lot of work that had to go into that.
Oh, great story. Josh, you'll get a kick out of this. You probably don't even know this. You know the name Brian Campstra?
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yes.
Yeah. And obviously John Sullivan, pastor at Spirit of God Fellowship, who's now with Jesus. John calls me up. This is the kind of heart John Sullivan has. Uh-huh. He's a pastor of Spirit of God Fellowship, calls me, hey, Bouwer, I understand you're doing a new experience in worship. What's that going to be like? I said, I have no idea. I said, I'm leading the band. He goes, do you know how to play instruments? I go, no. He goes, you know how to sing? I go, I can sing on tune. This is what he does. He says, I'll loan you Brian Campstra for 6 months.
Wow.
I said, what? You're going to give me your worship leader? He goes, yeah, for 6 months. And I said, are you serious? And seriously, he did. And Brian Campstra helped us create a new experience in worship that now I would say to you is the rest is history for the worship experience. That ignited the gospel. People were coming to Christ. We went from 1 service to 2 to 3 to 4, and then honestly ran out of space in South Holland. We tried to find 20 acres in South Holland. They didn't have it. And then we launched here in 2003 in Dyer, Indiana, which is just, 11 miles from South Holland, but it's Indiana. So like my office, if I point this way, those trees across the street is Cook County, Illinois, and I'm in Indiana. That's how close we are. Yeah.
Well, that's interesting because I didn't know. So you said you first were trying to find 20 acres of land in the South Holland area. You just couldn't find it. Right. And then Dyer became growing up in that area, what's so funny, my wife and I, Sarah, we talk about this all the time, in South Holland, Indiana, even though what you're describing is very true, and it's actually a closer commute to what I drive every day to my church here. But Indiana might as well have been a different country.
Exactly. Josh, it continues to be hilarious. People will call me up and say, hey, how close are you to Indianapolis? I'm like, I'm 30 minutes from downtown Chicago.
Right. We are very far from Indianapolis. That's the answer to that. Man. So that's a question I have for you just from a leadership perspective, because, I sit down with pastors all the time. And, we're always at conferences that talk about church growth, to talk about, what God has for you. If you're not growing, you're dying, and all these different things. But in these beginning stages with the new experience, did you always have, so think about here we are in 2024, and I just read a faith church with 6 campuses, 5,000 worshiping in these campuses and locations. We're talking about a church in 1990 that's 250 people. Did you see this? Was this out there in the vision, or is it something that you just were following God's lead and God did the work here? What would you say?
No, I did not see this. I did not come to Faith Church going, oh yeah, I'm going to be quote unquote a mega church, which I can't stand that term. But I mean, because what does that mean?
Mm-hmm.
It means souls are coming to Christ, really. But what I did see is each step was a holy risk. And it became a pattern that I continue to this day, discipling pastors and churches to say, most of the time churches will risk to what human beings think they can do.
Mm-hmm.
But holy risk are that plus another huge step. And that's the pattern that I think God really desires. Holy risk require faith. Otherwise, it's just a human risk. Like a lot of church boards are like, oh, we can't do that. We can do this, because they're looking at what a human can do. But I challenge churches and leaders to say a holy risk is that plus another huge jump, which requires complete faith in God. Let me give you an example. So we're in South Holland, 4 services. We're out of space. We're going like crazy. And we needed to raise resources to build our first a relocated site in Dyer, Indiana, which is in the border. And we did a campaign and we raised $4.8 million. We needed really probably closer to $7 million. And so I came to the board and said, okay, we're going to have to reduce the size of the building to match at $4.8 million. One of our senior saint elders, who's still alive, he's 90 years old, Elmer says, 4.8 is what we can do. 7.2 is what God can do. Let's go for it. Mm-hmm. He said, if the Lord's in it, we're going to see him come through. He goes, because there's going to be a flood of new people coming to Christ. So we left South Holland with 900 people. We went with the building the new site. 1 year later, we had 2,000 people. And we had all the resources. We had all the resources we needed, and we paid off our debt relatively quickly. Mm-hmm. And then the same thing in every step of the way, I go, figure out what you think humans can do. And go, okay, now where's the God step? Does that make sense, Josh?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think that stops us all the time, especially when you're leading a church and you want to be a good steward of the finances and things that God has given you. And every year you get into these business meetings and you're talking budgets and you're talking all of this. And you normally in our church, and I'm sure with Faith Church as well, you present these things to the congregation. You just talk through some of these matters. And when you present the faith budget, the God budget, you fear that it's going to come across as not being good stewards, that you're being careless or whatever it may be. Right. But what I have found is often when you are doing the human side of things and you're just more not having faith in God, really what you're doing is you're not following what God has for you. You're not really seeking maybe what God is showing you here. Here's the calling or what I want this church to do. You're more playing it into the safe comfort zone.
Yeah, you're right. And I think that is what I was going to, you took the word out of my mouth. We see comfort, what's convenient and comfortable. God's saying, I want to know what's courageous. What will require you? Now, I'm certainly not advocating carelessness.
Right.
Financially or even stupidity in terms of risk of ministry. But when you pray, now I'm not joking you, our church, the elders and deacons of Faith Church prayed for 3 hours one Sunday afternoon just to determine should we make the step of faith from South Holland to Dyer. 3 hours on our knees. Mm-hmm. Because we knew that was going to be a huge risk. But we all were unanimous by the end of the 3 hours. We're like, we sense God's in on it. And I'm so glad we took that step of faith. It would have been so easy to just say, oh, we got 4 services going South Holland. We'll just level off here. We're doing great. Because everything was fine. We were making budget. We were growing staff. People were coming to Christ. But I said, what would be the God-side step? Yeah. Good stuff, Josh. Good question.
Yeah. What year was that when you said you were doing the 3 hour of the prayer? Do you remember?
Yeah. It's going to be, I want to say 2001. Because we moved here in 2003, so it was either 2001 or 2002.
Yeah, it makes sense. And of course, Northwest Indiana, well known now for a few decades, has exploded and just so much growth and the things that were going on. But I will say this, and I could be completely wrong. But I would just say in my in my younger days, in my mind, Faith Church was one of the first that I had known of, where you all had grown to a place and then didn't just build on the place where you were, but located to an entirely different state.
Where very few churches do that.
Yeah, and so it blew my mind. So now, especially in the chair that I sit in, where I am, and I look at that and I go, "Oh my goodness, what did that do on a personal level for you leading a church?" Because there had to be some disagreement. There had to be some people who came at you and went, "You're gonna," if I were to something when I first became the pastor of this church in New Hope, someone who loved the church and a very well-meaning person who cared about the church was very concerned about what I was going to do to the church that she loved, and came up to me and was very honest and said, "I just feel you're going to destroy this place." And that shocked me. That was something I wasn't prepared for. I thought, hey, we're one big happy family and we're all in this together. But someone had genuine concerns and it hurt. But then it did make me aware of, okay, this is a heavy responsibility and something I need to be prayed up on and seeking God. So what did it do to you on a personal level?
Yeah. A lot of things going through my head right now. One is, it was devastating to have that experience that you had. People don't realize that I know what it's like. I can relate to that, Josh. I remember the person who was the kind of the pillar of the church saying, "Thanks a hell of a lot for ruining my church, Bob. I'm out of here." And that hurt. Now, in that story, turned out unbelievable. A few years later, they came back with humility saying, "We were wrong. Would you accept us back?"
Wow.
But that's because the Lord used the ministry to touch one of his relatives and come alive in Christ, and the relative is alive in Jesus. And he's like, so it can't be all that bad, And they're faithful worshipers now here again. There's a famous pastor, I'll leave unnamed, of a very large church who met me one time and said, "Bob, I want you to know something. Very few pastors turn churches around. Most churches that grow at this rapid are founding pastors. Very rarely will you see a person like a Josh or a Bob who take a church that already exists and God turn that around and have explosive growth." And he said, "Open up your shirt." And I was like so intimidated by him. I was ready to do it. He goes, I'm just kidding.
Open up your shirt.
He literally said this to me. I go, "Oh," I started, he goes, "No, I'm just kidding." He goes, "I want to see the bullet wounds."
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And I'm like, wow. He goes, "I know that there's bullet wounds." And there were. Now, what kept me going, Josh, and probably keeps you going, is my foundation is not the people of the church. It's not the foundation of a big church. The foundation is my identity in the person of Jesus Christ. And I knew there were dark moments. Oh my gosh, terribly painful moments. But in those moments, I was on my knees saying, "Lord, if this is from you, you will bless it." And I've checked my heart. It's for you. It's not for Bob Bouwer. It's not for a great name. It's for you and your kingdom. And I would get up in those prayers confident in the Lord. But they were difficult. Not being liked by people is not a fun thing.
Yeah. You're right when it hurts. And in the story that I was sharing you, the person who had come up to me, I had an elder come up to me later and say, "Well, you better think about that, because they're about 10% of our giving on an annual basis." And that was also my first foray into that world, right? Of okay, so my first job here as a senior pastor is to lose the number one tither of the church. And now you talk about faith. Now I'm starting to freak out. But I will say this: that lady who was a sweet lady, years later, they did leave, and she came back. She was at a funeral, and she came up to me and she walked up and she said, "It looks great. Everything that I'm seeing here,
awesome,
looks great." And so, so that relationship is there. Not as they don't attend the church, but God is good in that.
And there's the ones that left here too. And I've maintained a healthy relationship with them because this was just not their style. And they wanted a church where it's more their style, more traditional style in that process.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
You know what I learned? Sorry to cut you off, but
no.
One of the things I learned in the process, because now I've been at New Hope for 18 years, and you've been at Faith Church since 1990. Okay,
34 years.
34 years. What I found is when people love something and someone new comes in and has these new ideas and feel God's leading, I think there's a fear that people think, well, they're just going to come and implement all this stuff, and then when the next best thing comes along, they're going to bail and leave us high and dry. And what brings the resolution to the story, like what you shared about the person who shared that with you and the person with me, we're still here. Like we were called to a church and called to a place that we knew God was wanting to do a work, right? Yeah. And you weren't just in it for the quick stepping ladder or to the next location, whatever. But there was a love for that church as well, and you really felt God was calling it to something. Yeah,
exactly. I remember a church in California contacted me when the church was growing in its rapid fire growth. It was a mega church in California. They were offering me the world, financially, ministry-wise, job description-wise. I flew out there once. I got off the plane and said, no, this is not from the Lord. And I had to bluff my way through the weekend and told them, no, I'm not interested. And then I came back to Faith Church, and I was up front and said, hey, the church in California was inquiring me, but I said, I love this church. I love the vision of what we have, and I love you. And in some respects, that was an octane boost that the church needed at that time, because they found out that I was in here. I gave up the world, if you will, to stay in the dirt and grime of ministry here at Faith. And I'm so glad God kept me here.
Yeah. Well, that definitely flies in the face of maybe how the corporate world would work, right? Like where you use opportunities or you grow to certain points and then you advance in your career, whatever. And that's just kind of an example of how ministry can be different in that sense, you know?
Absolutely.
Man, I would love to go down that road too. Go, what's that like, getting off the plane and go, no, this ain't it. This ain't it.
My wife was with me, and I said, Lori, I don't think this is right. She goes, I sent the same thing. Mm-hmm. And I mean, it was really a very tempting from a human fleshly standpoint, but I'm so glad the Lord allowed me to persevere.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things in your story that I love, and I mentioned this in the very beginning of the show, was your accessibility and how you love to help other leaders and other pastors. And even when I took this role now, it's been 11 years ago, and one of the things that I did is I contacted 3 different pastors, people who are in the ministry for a long time, people who had a desire to help young pastors like me. And I reached out to you, and you were so gracious, and we went and sat at the little breakfast restaurant right by Faith Church, and I just said, okay, here's what I'm looking at, and whatever. And you pulled out this pen and paper and just started, okay, here's some things you're going to face, and wrote those down. And those things were pretty true to the mark. Everything kind of played out what we talked about. But the fact that you took time out of your schedule to do that and to meet with me of who am I? You know, it was a special thing though, you know?
Yeah. I appreciate that.
Yeah. And so you continue to do that, right? It yes. sounds to me that this is something you love to do. And when you said the whole thing about the shirt, let me show you the bullet wounds. I have found now 10 years into it, and I have scars of my own, that my heart also, and this is one of the reasons why I do this podcast, is I love to talk to ministry leaders and say, let's share the story so we can help other people.
Yes.
And when you go through things, I think it's just God gives us these experiences so we can share them with others. And
well, it's biblical. I mean, the Lord says you go through those fires in order to be a minister to others as well. Last week, Friday, a local pastor in the region, within an hour, he called me, Bob, can we do coffee? Well, my new role now, just being the senior pastor, not senior pastor and lead pastor of the largest site, has freed me up to be able to do that. And I love that part. I love that role of walking with younger pastors who are in the midst of the grind of growing a church and growing God's kingdom. And I sat down with this pastor, and about halfway through, I said, are you burning out? I saw his face drop. I said, do the walls feel like they're closing in? He goes, yes. I said, do you feel like you can't escape? He goes, oh my gosh, yeah. I go, I've been there. Bro, you need help. You need soul care because your soul is broken. Because he's doing an amazing thing in God's church. But to get there, it was tough. And he's in his late 30s, and the walls are closing in. I said, I remember. I said, make sure your soul's okay. Otherwise, you're going to burn out or you're going to fail.
Yeah, yeah. So what does a pastor do in that sense? Like when you said you've been through something like that, was there something you did when you felt the walls closing in, or do you step back? I mean, what does that look like?
Yeah. Well, with the cases I had were burnout. I could sense that I was running out of energy. I was kind of numb. And so I did seek out counsel. Mm-hmm. I went to one of the counselors we refer to in church. I called her up and said, listen, I said, I had this weird phenomenon where I don't have any emotion. I said, I'm always up, but I'm not always super happy, and I'm not sad at all, but I feel numb. She said, yeah, you're on the verge of burnout. Mm-hmm. So I did some therapy for 6 weeks. I went and just heard her say, you need to take care of your soul. You need to learn to rest. And I became very disciplined on rest. My Mondays are sacred for me. And time alone, she said, you're an extrovert, but you need introvert time to refuel. And so then I literally went to the insiders of the elders of the church and said, hey, I'm in a healthy spot right now because I almost burned out, and I went and got help. And so I told this young pastor, I said, you are going to sin and fall, or you're going to burn out. Mm-hmm. I said, you need to get soul care. Maybe you need to get counsel. Maybe you need to find a place like Soul Care Ministry in Colorado, or some place where you need to rehab, but you are close. Your soul is burning out. And tears started flowing. He got all choked up. And I said, be careful. The enemy is lurking around, prowling around like a lion, ready to devour you. Mm-hmm. And because of the fruitfulness of the gospel.
Yeah. And I think in those moments, our human nature, everything inside of us says, when we're tired, or burnout is really a word that, in recent years has become more known. But, back in the day, whenever you were feeling burnout, the solution was, well, put your shoulder to the plow and push harder and push right through this time or whatever. And in ministry, that can be toxic.
Yes.
That's the danger zone, putting your shoulder to the plow and pushing through. Because it's kind of like an engine that is spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning. And basically what's happening is there's a rope that's going to get wrapped up in it, and it's going to seize that engine up. Like you're going to hit a point where that burnout is going to turn to you're going to throw a rod,
Yes.
And that's not healthy, and that's not good.
No. And I was able to coach him about rest, about boundaries, about the fact that I said, do you feel like you're growing, but you're never satisfied? He goes, oh my gosh, yeah. He goes, I thought when the church got to be 1,000, I'd be satisfied. 2,000, I thought I'd be satisfied. No, your satisfaction is actually in the person of Jesus Christ, and your soul needs to be carried by Christ, and you'll come alive again. Mm-hmm. And I said, I speak from experience. Yeah. And I did that. I started to rest. I started to set boundaries. Like I have a boundary. I told the elders, I said, I'm only going to be out 2 nights out of 7. And I said, of course, holidays you're out, Easter and Christmas, a lot more. But I said that, and they were like, we don't want you burning out. We get it. Mm-hmm. So anyway, yeah.
Yeah. And the support of your leadership on that is very important, because other people have questions when they, like if you say, I'm only gonna be out 2 nights. Well, that's especially in a growing church where people say, well, we have needs. We want the pastor around, or we want to see Bob at this event or at this, whatever it may be. And I think everyone has their idea of what they think the pastor should be doing and what the pastor should be at, or when he should call, when he should, all those things. Right. So to have the support of the leadership in advance to know, this is the way we'd like to see this play out is important. And even to have that conversation is important, It
is.
Man. So when did you, let's talk a little bit about the U-Turn book that you wrote. And this is something, in fact, I pulled this description off Amazon, but most pastors in America are ministering in churches that are in a state of stagnation or decline. The U-Turn Church walks readers through the debilitating roadblocks of tradition, lack of vision or leadership, structural problems, and concerns about denominational distinctives to forge a new forward into a hope-filled future. And the book contains stories of two churches, one being Faith Church, that have experienced healthy transformation. And readers will see that there's not just one right way to reverse decline. They'll receive practical help and wisdom born of experience as they begin a U-turn journey. And you co-wrote this book. Mm-hmm. And how did that come about? Did you guys always have this in mind, or who brought up the idea first?
Well, Kevin Harney, first of all, is an author of many books, and he's a friend of mine. He was on staff as a teaching pastor here for 3 years as well. And he writes books for Zondervan, a lot of them. But Zondervan, Baker Bookhouse, Baker Publishing got a hold of Kevin and said, we've noticed that you, Kevin, took a rural church in West Michigan and turned it around. And your friend Bob Bouwer took a suburban church, and God used him to turn the church around. What if you guys wrote a book about those distinctives of how to turn a church around? Because there's a lot of churches that need to be turned around. Mm-hmm. And that's what was the impetus for starting to write the book. And Kevin's a writer. I'm a talker who turned into a writer. And it was actually really fun because he's a pastor in Shoreline Community Church in Monterey, California. He would fly in and we would write the book together for a week. And then I would fly out to his house and we would spend a week writing. And he was a writer. He taught me actually how to write, and it was really fun. And that process was really good, but it was also beautiful because it clarified in writing what God did in our story. And, for example, one of the chapters is on urgency. And I said, really nothing happens until urgency sets in. Mm-hmm. I go, like, a person gets overweight and they don't take care of themselves, and the doctor goes to them and says, your cholesterol is super high. You're near a heart attack or a stroke. That's called the urgency. And all of a sudden, for some reason, the person starts going for walks and starts eating right and losing weight because of urgency. Yeah. And I said, many churches are unwilling to look at the urgency necessary to turn church around. In Faith Story, this is crazy, Josh. I'm sitting in a restaurant with the executive team of Faith Church when I first got here. And these guys were older than me. They were super intimidating, came to their business office, and I'm just Bob. All of a sudden, one of the leaders takes his cup, and I'm not an angry guy. He had a temper, slams his fork down. He goes, I just want you to know I've done the math. If we keep losing the amount of people we had up until this year, we will be dead by 2020. We'll be out of people. And then he goes, but we're not going to get there. And well, he doesn't know what he was doing. He was destroying me because also I'm like, I don't want to lead a funeral procession. Right. I want to lead a parade of the gospel. And so that urgency became the motivator for me. I'm like, Lord, I don't want to bury Faith Church. I want to make it alive. I want a resurrection story. And that was but I think many churches are unwilling to realize how urgent it is that they do something about it. Mm-hmm. And urgency is a chapter in the book because that story, I'm like, I don't want to be the Bob Bouwer who buried Faith Church. Yeah. Now there are many churches that don't exist today. The church in Ephesus doesn't exist. Philippi doesn't exist. Corinth doesn't exist. I understand the cycle of life, but I just didn't want to be a part of that. I want to be part of something that's alive and growing. Mm-hmm. And
Well, I think in that sense too, whether you could see where Faith Church is today or not, obviously God saw that, right? And I think God places dreams and visions in our hearts, especially in leadership, and we know through God's leading, maybe when one thing is supposed to die. It could even be a method in the church. There's certain times when the church is doing something and you feel God's going, that's supposed to die. It might even have support, but it's not supposed to continue, and you got to follow God's lead on that. But then also in this case where this leader slams his hand on the table and says, by 2020, we're out of people. But I think God puts that in your heart and says, no, that urgency is there because God is going to do that work. And I think you probably just had that nudging from the Holy Spirit that there was more. There was more that was going to happen. And then shortly, side by side urgency is vision. And I did have a vision, Josh, of a church that was alive. I saw a picture in my head of what could be. Mm-hmm. And that, even though the congregation didn't see it, it was my job to instill that same picture
to the people that were influential of vision. So I would literally meet with men and women in Sunday school meetings at the time, friends. I would meet with them privately and say, let me picture a church where blah, 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 blah. And I could see their eyes go, now that's something I want to follow. I want to see. And once I established enough of the people that saw that vision, it did kind of naturally take place. Mm-hmm. The other thing about this U-turn process is I told the board, I said, most of the time church boards are yellow and red light boards, meaning most times you bring up a topic, it's yellow light. Kind of like, oh, I don't know. I don't know if we can get through the intersection. Yellow turns yellow, speed. Mm-hmm. But boards also are red light. Things come, no, we're not doing it. I told the board, I said, I think what's going to really make our future bright is if we become a green light board. Mm-hmm. I said, by the time the work and the proposal comes to the board, there's been enough investment of time and energy that more than likely, if we're a green light board, I said, can we become a green light, yellow light board instead of a yellow light, red light board? I saw their eyes clicking going, what did he just say? Mm-hmm. I asked the leaders, I said, we need to be a green light board with a little yellow, not a yellow with red. And so most of the decisions are yes. Mm-hmm. Because I said, coming to this meeting for the final decision, there has been prayer, study, time, effort, getting rid of bad motives, getting good motives, pure motives. I go, by the time it gets to us, we just need to discern we're in. Or here's a couple of moments of caution. Mm-hmm. And I think that has helped churches around the nation. I got a call from a church in England saying, how did you get a church board on? I said, and I gave them the illustration, red light, yellow light, green light. They're like, that's our problem. Mm-hmm. He said, we're a yellow, red, mostly red. And I said, well, you need to somehow disciple them that God's church, they are to bless. Mm-hmm. Leaders lead. That usually means steps of faith. That usually means green lights. That means scary green lights. Yeah. Ready to go.
Yeah. Well, I love that because one of the things that drives me insane, especially just with a creative mind or whatever it may be, I hate when ideas get shut down before they even get started.
There you go.
It drives me nuts. And then a little bit of my personality is when that idea gets shut down, now I want to go even further into it.
Now you're an athlete. Yeah. You're an athlete. You want to win.
Yeah. Now I'm like, oh, okay, well, let's make it even bigger. We have a thing we've been talking about doing here at New Hope. We have 20 acres of land. And in our back area, about 15 acres, the church sits on about 5 acres of it. And then we have 15 acres of open green space. And for years, we've been talking about wanting to build a prayer walk, basically turn it into an entire field with prayer stations, whatever it may be, where people from the community can come and just be a part and walk the church. And we can actually tell the gospel story of Christ through these different stations and just have it be that. And it's going to be a monumental thing. And financially and whatever, we are not in the place as a church where we could say, let's raise these funds out of the people of our church and let's do it. But it's never gone. I started talking about this 10 years ago. It's never gone away. And in fact, now it's only expanded into something that will cost far more than it would have in its initial phases. And now the vision for it is even becoming, how do we even involve people of the community who might want to be invested in this place, whatever it may be. And I share this because years ago, our board was more in the yellow-red light zone when it comes to this. Yeah. And recently it's become green light.
Yes.
And I would say, how do we know it's God in this case? Because it's never gone away. It's not something that every single Sunday I was up trumpeting and saying, let's prayer walk. It's something that people would come and go, hey, we need to be talking about that prayer walk. We need to be talking about that. And one of the things I'll tell you, because you'll be very familiar with this, what's the Catholic Church built off of 41, the
St. John the Evangelist.
Yes, okay, and what they built, and the
Shrine of Christ's Passion.
I went to that, I went and actually found the guy who built those sculptures and did the whole thing.
Frank Schilling, yep.
Yeah, and now I'm like, okay, so now it's starting to actually take shape of pictures. Not doing exactly what they've done, but a clearer picture now, 10 years down the road. My original plan for it was we were going to set up some pavers and some flowers around. Now it's turning into something that I believe in this Nashville area, which is very touristy. A lot of people come, that we have an opportunity as a church to build a prayer walk and a prayer place where people can get introduced to the gospel, and be a church that's in that. But it all goes back to what you're saying about a board when you share this vision, and it's more green light of going, that is so beyond what we can do that it's clearly a God thing.
Yes.
How do we do it?
Yes, that's so good.
And so it's fun to be in that space, but I've also been in the opposite space where you're more in the red light. Well, we want to be cautious, or let's just not do that at this.
Right.
And that can be harmful in the sense that, if you can just track with me here for a moment, every 6-7 days we have church services. We have messages to write. We have meetings to attend. We have Bible studies to teach. We have meeting with people, whatever. And you can get, those things are all obviously vastly important, but you can get caught in the loop of then just doing that and not dreaming, not seeking God for vision, and then just being comfortable, and then just getting used to red lights. Yep.
They're absolutely right.
And so for 34 years now, you've been in faith. Do you ever find yourself getting stuck in that?
Oh, without a doubt. In fact, I'm coming right out of a season of that, where COVID, followed by reestablishing the sites and locations of Faith Church, getting the energy to get them all going up again, prohibited the dreams. And I'm just coming out of that, where I am now starting to say, okay, Lord, what's next? Mm-hmm. And then establishing a board that's not answering questions month to month, but saying what could be next? What is the next vision? And we have some potential pretty cool things that are on the horizon that the busy train has got to stop. And that's why I'm going to go back to one of the conversations we had a little while ago about the importance of rest and rhythm and boundaries. Because when I get off the busy train, it's like the Lord floods my mind with possibilities. But if you're on the busy train, you can't see them, you can't hear them, you can't feel them, you can't know them. But right now I'm coming out of that season. So it's not like it goes away forever. Busy and the cycle of ministry comes and goes. And right now I'm just coming out of the craziest busy seasons with COVID and everything of restarting and getting all sites growing again, that now I'm going, all right, I'm ready. And now the change the senior pastor only hat is going to give me even more freedom to do that.
Yeah, that's what my next question was going to be. Now that you're kind of stepping into that role and the oversight of all of the campuses, and someone else is doing the lead pastor role at the Dyer campus, that's got to be pretty exciting for you to go, okay, I'm going to really have an opportunity to lean into this.
Yeah, it is. Faith chose, and I was with it, I was leading the cause. When we went multi-site, it was because of desperation. We were full here at Dyer. We needed to reproduce. We got wind of the idea of multi-site church. We could have chosen to do an all video venue. A lot of churches do that, and it's actually quite easy. It's easier, I think, in some respects, to have just a video venue. But I didn't personally want my face all around the region at the sites. I'm a Calvinist. And John Calvin, during the Reformation, I love to tell the story. So from one Sunday to the next, Geneva, Switzerland, which is all Catholic, became Protestant in 1 week, because the town council was the authority, and they said, we are becoming Calvinists. We're going to follow Reformation theology. From one Sunday to the next, all of a sudden, I like to kiddingly say, all of a sudden by Wednesday, Calvin's going, oh crap, what are we going to do with all these pulpits? So he wrote a sermon. Get a load of this. He wrote a sermon, had 6 secretaries handwrite it, gave it to 6 elders and said, you take this church, you take this church, you take this church. He was actually multi-siting. Mm-hmm. And so then he took those elders and he said, now I need to train you and become pastor. So he created the Calvin Academy, and he raised up pastors. That was the vision I had for multi-sites as well, is that it wouldn't be my face. I would like to raise up leaders to take the churches, like all of Faith Church sites. We have 5 locations. All 5 locations are healthy and growing, and all of them are led by awesome pastors who we've raised up. Mm-hmm. And it is in a really neat place now to be I'm only living into it, Josh, 6 days. So don't get me wrong. I don't know all the answers yet. But it does feel neat to be able to say, okay, now I'm going to be the visionary leader and the coach of 5 sites, pastors and their congregations. And a year from now, maybe we could talk. I'll be a little different.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's got to be, at least in the beginning here, a bit exciting because you've been in there for 34 years. But I would feel like another chance to kind of reinvent yourself a little bit and to have some new life pumped into the job, you know? Well,
one of the reasons why we wanted to do this, the board said, we want your influence. God has gifted me with certain things I own. That's him. It's not me. Mm-hmm. He gave me these gifts. And they said, we want to expand it beyond the walls of Faith Dyer. Mm-hmm. You know, so we make the decision. Within days, a church in Brazil asked if I'd come and speak at their mission conference. The Global Leadership Network asked if I'd serve on the board of trustees. There's another affirmation. I can't think of it off the top of my head right now. It's like the Lord saying, see, I'm going to influence the territory for a little while before you head into the sunset.
Yeah. You know? Well, I love it because, you're going to be one of the breakout speakers at Exponential's National 180 Conference. It's November 19th through the 21st. And when I saw you post that on Facebook, I was like, of course, that makes complete sense. And then I was like, why weren't you doing this sooner? Maybe you're like, well, I hadn't been asked, but I'm looking forward to seeing you do more things like that. So I did comment. I was a bit disappointed you aren't out on the West Coast one because I would have flown out there to do that one. But
exactly, no, it's exciting. To be able to share. The theme is disciple making, and that is right in my heart. That's in my wheelhouse. And I'm excited to share how God is, because one of the things that unfortunately larger churches like yours and ours get stereotyped is like, oh, they're a mile wide and inch deep. You know, I'm like, no, our people are in the Word of God. We're growing the relationship with God. We have a plan of strategic discipleship making, involves prayer and the Word of God and community. And I'm excited to share that, what God has done. Right now at Faith Church, there are over 2,000 people who read Joshua chapter 6 today. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's kind of fun.
Yeah.
And being held accountable for that.
Yeah.
And praying 7 minutes a day, minimum.
All doing it together. That's awesome.
All doing it together.
That's very cool. Well, I'll tell you what. I'll be honest with you. Tell you, New Hope, we aren't anywhere close to the size of what Faith Church in Dyer is. No. We're a smaller church, but I tell you what. One of the things I love that we do as a church of our size is God really gave us a vision and a heart to be able to do the things that large churches do. And as far as reaching and evangelizing, how do we make disciples? How do we put out content and preach the gospel? Things just like this. How do we send God's message out into the world and reach as many people as we possibly can? Not be inward focused, but to be outward focused in what we do. And so we do share that heart as well. And well, listen, I want to thank you so much for taking the time. You've been a blessing to me in my life in that you do things like this, but then also on the occasions where I get to go up to Indiana. And if I reach out, you say, if you're available, you say, hey, let's meet up and talk. And so thank you for how you have a heart for young leaders and you want to help them and to take your experiences and share it with them. You're a blessing. And so if you don't get told that enough, just know that you are a blessing to many.
Josh, before I go, I want to say you're a blessing. You've been so much fun to walk with and kind of parallel life, and God's on the move in your life as well in your ministry. I do hope, and God bless you there, brother.
Oh, man. Thank you. Well, if you want to know more about Pastor Bob Bouwer, go to wearefaith.org. wearefaith.org. That is the church website. But then also, he's going to be a speaker at this conference, exponential.org. And that's November 19th through 21st. And you need to sign up. That's the central conference that you're going to be one of the speakers at. And then finally, you can go to Amazon.com or where books are sold and get U-Turn Church and check out that book. So anyway, Pastor Bob, thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Blessings, buddy.
Yes, and I'll be praying for you at Faith Church, and you be praying for New Hope. We'll make that agreement.
Promise.
Okay, one last thing before I let you go, because we've talked about your church board. Have they ever sat you down and talked about your unhealthy like for puns on Facebook?
Oh my gosh. If I had one, I'd fire back. I am the pun master. My brain is wired that way. I apologize in advance.
Okay. Some of them are really bad, but but they're usually good. So I just had to throw that in there.
The congregation gets a kick out of it. Yes.
No,
they groan.
It's awesome. I say that just joking aside. It's fun. So you go on posting those puns.
I promise I will.
Okay. All right, Pastor Bob. Thank you. Appreciate you
Josh.
being on the show.
Lord
all right,
bless
everybody. Josh Huisman Podcast, new episodes every week. And special thanks to Bob Bouwer, the pastor of Faith Church, for being with me today. Share this episode and the others with your friends and family, and we'll see you with a new episode next week.